One of the most enduring and mysterious questions in Tolkien's legendarium is the question of death. Specifically, why are elves seemingly immortal, whereas men must die and their souls leave the world? Why does this difference exist? Why are the two kindreds so fundamentally different in this regard? And what does it mean for the future of the world? Hi there. Welcome to the Elven Review, where we take a detailed look at some of the intriguing questions of great fantasy literature. In the Silmarillion, Tolkien's history and cosmogony of the world, Finrod Felagund is described as one of the wisest and most honourable of the Noldoran elves. He was one of the elves that returned to Middle-earth from Valinor during the First Age, when the Noldor made war against Morgoth for the recovery of the Silmarils. He was also the first of the Noldor to encounter humans when he came upon the people of Beor, after they had crossed the Blue Mountains and entered Beleriand in the west of Middle-earth. Finrod became a great friend of humans, and was ever fascinated by their similarities and differences to elves. Of particular interest to him, and to elves generally, was the strange and surprisingly different fate of humans who, unlike elves, were mortal. Although elves didn't get ill, and they aged almost imperceptibly, they could be killed, but even then their souls remained in the world, in the halls of Mandos, the halls of awaiting, and could eventually be rehoused in new bodies to live in the world again. The souls of men, on the other hand, leave the confines of the world when they die, and not even the Valar, wise and powerful angelic beings, know where their souls of men go. The possible reasons for this fundamental difference were discussed in the History of Middle-earth Volume 10, which is called Morgoth's Ring, in a little-known tale, or rather dialogue, that records a conversation that took place when Finrod visited the house of Andreth, a wise human woman of the people of Beor. It is called Athrabeth Finrod a Andreth. As a young maiden, Andreth had fallen in love with Finrod's brother, Aegnor. But though he returned her feelings, he could not be with her, as it was the custom of elves not to wed, have romance or have children during a time of war. And at that time they were in the midst of a terrible and tragic war against the dark power of the north, Melkor, also known as Morgoth. This caused terrible anguish for Andreth, particularly as the war against Morgoth dragged on and she became ever older, while Aegnor retained his elvish youth, beauty and vitality. When Finrod visits Andreth, their discussion turns to the mortality of men and the immortality of elves. Andreth puts forward a fascinating theory popular amongst her people, that men were once immortal like elves, but the dark power of Morgoth corrupted them and made them mortal. But Finrod points out that Morgoth does not have the power to change the fate of the children of Eru Ilúvatar, humans and elves, and that only Eru himself could do this, but that if this occurred, then men must have offended Eru in some way to bring this fate upon them. Eru Ilúvatar is God, the creator of the world and the universe, of all things. This leads them to discuss the concept of Arda Mard, Arda being earth, the world, and the marring of the world referring to the corruption that Morgoth has brought into it, tainting all things to some degree with his evil spirit. This includes all people who are also tainted by Morgoth's corruption, so that everything is askew, or marred, from how it would otherwise be without Morgoth's evil. Only in the undying lands of the Valar is the original state of the world preserved without Morgoth's corruption, at least to some extent, although not totally, as Morgoth was still able to destroy the two trees that gave holy light to those lands, and also sow the seeds of the discord that led to the rebellion of the Noldor. This of course does have its allusions to the Christian idea of original sin and the state of man before the fall from grace in the Garden of Eden. All people were then tainted, being born into this world with original sin from Adam and Eve's rebellion against God. Likewise, we may wonder what the world and the people who live in it might have been like had this fall of Adam and Eve not taken place. Would suffering exist? Would our lives be immeasurably better? Andreth's idea that men will want something more like elves, echoes this Christian concept. And Finrod voices the idea that, as in Christian theology, men may have rebelled against God and brought suffering and possibly death upon themselves. Therefore I say to you, Andreth, what did ye do, ye men, long ago, in the dark? How did ye anger Eru? The fascinating thing about the discussion between Andreth and Finrod is that it really delves into the heart of what is arguably the biggest question in Tolkien's legendarium. Why are the elves, for all intents and purposes, immortal? And why do men die and their souls leave the world? This situation is generally viewed by men as a grave injustice against them, most notably by the Númenóreans. Finrod never really agrees that men were once immortal like the elves, and gives many reasons why men are different in their engagement and perception of the world, and suggests that men were always designed by Ilúvatar to be immortal, with their existence in the world a transitory state. However, he does acknowledge that Morgoth's corruption of the world may have shortened men's lives and diminished their vitality and connection to the world. Finrod then posits something extraordinary, that rather than the lesser siblings to elves, it may be that the purpose of men is something far more profound. This then, I propound, was the errand of men, not the followers, but the heirs and fulfillers of all, to heal the marring of ardour already foreshadowed before their devising, and to do more, as agents of the magnificence of Eru, to enlarge the music and surpass the vision of the world. So what does he actually mean here? Does he mean that men in the future will accomplish this? Or that men will return from beyond the confines of the world, their souls rehoused in more transcendent forms to do this? It's not really clear. Another interesting thing Finrod says is that elves are not really immortal, since their fate is tied to the fate of the world. And when the world, Ardamard, ends, the elves will also come to their end, so they simply must wait longer than men for their death. But in his vision of men as the fulfillers and healers of ardour, men will return or ascend to undo the hurt of the world and the taint of Morgoth, and therefore elves can live on in the wonder of the new world. Andreth then asks, "And what, when ye were not singing, would ye say to us?" Finrod laughs and says, "Why, wise lady, I think we should tell you tales of the past, and of ardour that was before, of the perils and great deeds and the making of the Silmarils. We were the lordly ones then. But ye would then be at home, looking at all things intently as your own. Ye would be the lordly ones. The eyes of the elves are always thinking of something else, ye would say. But ye would know then of what we were reminded, of the dark days when we first met, and our hands touched in the dark. Beyond the end of the world we shall not change, for memory is our great talent, as shall be seen ever more clearly as the ages of this ardour pass." This is a really fascinating and wondrous statement, and it gives us at least one possibility for why elves and men have these different fates. Men are changed. They come into this world briefly and then move on. Only they will eventually return in a sense and in a more transcendent form to heal the world and fulfill God's original design. While elves, by contrast, are memory and continuity. Men will deliver the world for elves, and in return, elves will help men remember all that happened in the great span of time before. As amazing as this vision is, though, it doesn't assuage Andreth's melancholy, and she returns to the here and now. What then is to be done now? For ye speak as if these things are, or as if they will assuredly be, but men have been diminished, and their power is taken away. This provokes a conversation about hope, as Finrod presses Andreth to look for hope, and although she describes the despair in which men walk, she also recalls a belief among some humans, known as the Old Hope, and that the number of people who believe this has increased since they arrived in Beleriand. Not surprisingly, Finrod is immediately intrigued. Now at this point the conversation develops in a different and wholly remarkable way, as Andreth recounts the hope of some men that Eru will enter into the world himself and heal it. So to find out more about this revelation, please see part 2 of this series titled, "Did Finrod and Andreth Anticipate Jesus?" Thank you for listening to part 1 of this series, and please let me know in the comments what you think of Finrod's conjecture that men will deliver and heal the world.